So, me, Vincent DeVice. I am currently entering into I am currently in my last semester of nursing school. I would say I started reading about NDEs when I was in high school. So I would say around 2008, 2009, somewhere around there. And one of the first books I read or was exposed to was Dr. Jeffrey Long's book, Evidence of the Afterlife. That was one of the first ones I read. And I really thought it was incredible how he put together the evidence. It was very matter of fact. It was very well written. And that, I say, was my initial exposure. And then that grew into reading more and more. And what I found was that every experience that I would read, I would get lost. I would get captivated in what those experiencers were talking about. And it just continued on from there for me. And from that point on, I was regularly reading near-death literature from that point forward. And I got out of high school. I was Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, and went on to pursue a major in graphic design. So I went to a very secular art school. And then when I had gotten out of art school, I was looking for long-term secure employment. And what I found was that most graphic design jobs are outsourced. So you may be with a company for a period of time, and then you do the project. Once the project's over, you have to look for another job. So that was very difficult for me. And I was a server waiting on tables throughout all of that, throughout high school and college. And then when I was attempting to find work, I was 24, and that was the year that my dad passed away. My dad suddenly passed away from a heart attack. So that completely turned my world and my mother's world upside down. So I eventually went on to school again. I went back to school after that, and I had to take an anatomy and physiology course for any major. If you pursue any major, I was planning to do a business major and combine it with my graphic design degree. And I took anatomy and physiology class, and I fell in love with it. I thought the science was incredible. And then this led to a path toward nursing, and which is the path that I'm currently on now. So that's essentially the basis of my story. There's definitely more I think we can touch on later on in the panel. So yes, thank you.
Yeah, introduce yourself. Right. Well, I first want to thank everybody from Neil to my co-panelists, Vince, John, Debbie, and Darren for being a part of this panel and us all come together to present such a very fascinating topic. So who am I exactly? Well, my name is Joseph Hayne, but you can all call me Joe. I'm a recent graduate from Holy Family University with a bachelor's in psychology. My story with near-death experiences goes back years, prior to when I was around 13 or 14 years old. I was introduced to that concept of near-death experiences through both my religion and my father, who has a interest in near-death experiences. I was introduced actually through a book called Heaven is For Real, written by a pastor. And ever since then, my interest in near-death experiences has grown since then. How this ties in with my life also influences my hopeful career choice. As some of my co-panelists know, I have a call into the priesthood, and I really think that having a knowledge of near-death experiences really can help make my clients, my future parishioners, have a better understanding of life after death. Because really, quite frankly, and I'll touch more on this later on down in the discussion, how I think we can be further enriched through these accounts, and especially after with 40 years of research backing us up through IANDS, which is quite impressive. I think we can all grow in knowledge through hearing these stories. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
All right. First off, again, thank you very much. It is a great honor for speaking and being a part of such an important part of history. 40 years done again. Congratulations. But enough about that. On to me. My name is John Hayne. I am the younger brother of Joe over there. I am in my last year for majoring in computer management information systems, which, to put it bluntly, is computer science. Very similarly, first heard about NDEs through the book Heaven is for Real through our father. And from there, it just kind of exploded, just reading a little bit more and more about other people's stories from just online and other books, and even a couple movies that were made, including the movie adaptation of Heaven is for Real. Good movie, by the way. So I felt like it really cemented a little bit into my life. Like, there is something all of us can see and will experience at some point in our lives, that there's something after, clearly, when we die. And that IANDS has done a great job of just analyzing, studying, and just getting everything down into a more concrete form instead of just out in the wild. Oh, there's this story and this story. IANDS has done a fantastic job of just centralizing everything, I feel like, after learning about this organization. I think that summarizes me pretty good.
So let me just throw out first the fact that all of you are students in some way. And you've all talked about, I'm a student of being the priesthood, nursing, computer. In other words, all of you have said something about studenthood and so on. Do you see presently, students that you're with, that there is any interest in any discussions that y'all have? I'm going to use nursing for an example. I mean, when we talk about resuscitating somebody, the possibility that they come back, hey, that happens, we hope. And then what about after they have come back, and then what about their recovery and etc.? So in nursing school, it makes perfect sense, because since I am a nurse, it makes perfect sense that we would talk about this. So certainly, Vince, you might be able to address that, but the rest of you, what are you seeing right now at all? We want to help people learn and grow and know, but what do you see right now amongst students that you're even involved with in your venue now?
In regards to both my major and just the school that I'm in, the business school, unfortunately, there is very little talk just about any religious topic, be it NDEs or just anything, because our school is mainly focused on business, on the physical world. And it's, even in my school, just the general university, there is no real talk about what happens after. And all the classes I've taken, religious and non-religious, it's not talked about whatsoever. And I feel it's kind of disappointing that something wouldn't even be talked about at a religious university, something this big that I feel is a good chunk of religion, because it affirms and proves in a way that there is something after we die, and that it should be known to us, that it should be talked about, even for a week test. I feel like there should be a mentioning of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, I didn't hear you say in any negative way. I didn't hear you say anything negative at all. Either one of you so far has not said anything negative about the places that you are. For example, the school that you are right now. Only doubt, wonder, why is this not going on? And so I appreciate that very much. Okay. The other two, how do you feel about studenthood and what you know, and etc.?
Well, with me, I actually went to the same school my brother did.
Mm-hmm.
And I can back up a lot of what he said, that even though I took psychology as my major, it was mentioned mostly in passing. I think we maybe got 10 seconds on the topic of near-death experience and kind of how it can be explained using psychology, like what we can observe under the MRI, and just left it at that. It was kind of left to like, well, you make up your own mind about it. And it kind of does baffle me a little bit that such an amazing topic is barely touched upon in the world of psychology, even in terms of the world of the clergy and priesthood, which have done a little bit of research into, that it's starting to kind of enter into that field a little bit, which is actually kind of reassuring. But again, kind of like the world of psychology, it's more so in passing. Like you might have this happens during your other experience, and that's it. It's left to make up. You're left to make up your own mind, which can be good and bad. But again, especially with this topic, we've been studying 40 years of IANDS and their research. It's stunning how we brush off 40 years of research into 5 seconds in the classroom and just go, that's that. So it's a little bit stunning, and I do hope we can learn more.
Okay.
There we go.
So I would say that for the most part, when I do talk about this with anyone, I would say that the majority of individuals I speak with about it are supportive. They understand that, yes, this happens. You know, they acknowledge some sort of a spirituality, and I would say in most cases it's like that. Now, us here, we all go to a Catholic university. So I've gone Catholic school, Catholic high school. In my heart, I am a Catholic in my heart. And I've always been able to acknowledge the soul, the human soul, and God, and angels and spirits, and all of those things. They're not unusual for me any way throughout my life, because I've always learned and studied these things from very young. So it's not unusual for someone like me to talk about this. Somebody like Darren with a different background, this information and this learning experience has been very new for him. So I think that your previous knowledge of this sort of thing, which has traditionally been given to us by religion, may not be in somebody's education. So that's fine. Also, I'd like to give an example. I had an instructor, and I was talking about the IANDS conference, and that I was very excited, and how hard we've been working on it. And she stopped me and she said, "Vince, I know that you're really happy about this and you're passionate about it. But if I were you, I would just keep this conference that you're going to on the down low. I wouldn't talk too much about it with a lot of people, maybe just your inner circle. You want to stick with stuff in nursing that's more research based and so forth, and peer reviewed and this and that." And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, it is. I mean, it is. The research that IANDS does is peer-reviewed research journals. So I saw there that in the professional medical community, there is sort of, I think, a little bit of a taboo going on still, where it may not be easy as a professional nurse or a nursing student to necessarily bring this up in a more open way. So I think I've seen a little bit of both. I've seen support, acceptance, and acknowledgement, and I've also seen caution and fear. So a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you all for saying that. And you see where, since each one of you got into your own avenue, that was objective number one. We were going to talk about the knowledge right now, the awareness that people have, well, in the student world for sure, that we were going to talk about this. So we are. I can tell the audience, and in every one of our sessions, and I have to compliment these guys that you see in front of you, because we didn't just meet 1 or 2 times. We were meeting every week to talk about this, and bless Darren's heart, because it's way different timing. So he was in the middle of the night sometimes, but bottom line, we were talking about what this is all about and what can we do And every time we kept coming back to, what about the education? We're talking about it again, guys, right now. We're talking about what do people know, and including just this very second when Vince said the instructor was a person who really wasn't very much leaning towards let's talk about it, and so on. I can tell you, and Diane Corcoran is in our audience right now, she'll tell you the exact same thing. I have given presentations as a faculty member or as a nurse who somebody called in to talk about near-death experiences to the Lions Club members, to the PTA, to those kinds of things, and classes of nurses, doctors, etc. Smallest group I ever did was 6 people. That's all that showed up. And the largest was 600. Not one time have I ever done a presentation where at least one person hasn't come up to me and said, can I tell you about my near-death experience? Can I tell you? And they're very shy and want to stay. I've had doctors pull me in the corner and say, I want to tell you about my son's near-death experience, but not in front of other doctors. And I'm not making fun of anybody. I'm saying, here we are in classroom settings. We're looking at different things. I'm talking about near-death experiences, but people are still afraid. In one of the presentations I did, it was a large group. When I walked away, you're supposed to get off the stage. When I walked away, I had a little Post-it note in my hand, and it said, thank you. For the first time in my life, I know I'm not crazy. So a person that was in that classroom had one. So I just told you all, I've never done one ever, and Diane will probably agree. Like I said, I've never done one where at least one person hasn't said, I had one of those. So ladies and gentlemen, if we're looking at students, we're all students, wouldn't you say? But from 40 to little bitty, they're having near-death experiences. What about the 3-year-old? What about the newborn? What about mom and the newborn during the delivery? Both had a near-death experience. Or baby had the near-death experience, mom didn't even know, and baby starts telling at 3 years old. So in terms of education, wow, I think we have a lot to do. And I can't remember which one of you said this, but you kept bringing up IANDS. And then Vince did the same thing about IANDS in the research. Wow, that's what we're talking about with the audience today, is remember, we're gonna walk away with one of our things saying, hey, what strategies can IANDS do or use to get people to understand, to raise awareness about near-death experiences. So one of our other objectives was to talk about barriers. So can each one of you say a little bit about what you've seen? That can certainly be personal and or professional, school, youth, etc. What barriers have you seen so far that kind of stood in the way of people understanding, accepting, even recognizing near-death experiences? What kind of barriers have you seen in your own walk?
As of February of 2021, 72% of Americans alone are on social media. So I feel like if there was a better promotion, if in a perfect world, social media was better, instead of just being like a boxing match between 2 people, as Darren would say, or just your news stories, food pictures, travel photos, and then just the latest wacky entertainment stuff that's coming out these days.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A proper way. What was that?
She said, thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If there was a way just like to better promote, hey, this is our message. This is IANDS. This is what we are. This is what we do. We are researchers into near-death experiences. This is what we have. Come check us out. Instead of Pope versus the president, here's what happened, raw, and all this social media stories of today of just your local hot topic, just click and watch the entertainment. If there was a way to educate. So I feel like social media in its current form is definitely one very large barrier, but that would be very hard to break because people are used to the norm of what social media has been established to this day of food pictures and box and match debates.
Okay.
Thanks, John. Well, the barrier I want to speak about is the barrier of fear, especially of being fear of being ridiculed by the quote unquote experts. A lot of people, as has been talked previously, that a lot of people are too scared to come forward with their stories. And when they do, they're usually very scared. They can be your average Joe or even the doctor who's had the near-death experience. A lot of them are very hesitant to share their stories. And those who publish the stories, like Dr. Raymond Moody and a lot of the pioneers, I am willing to bet they were probably scared of ridicule from their colleagues and from the scientific world. And that holds a lot of people back, because fear in of itself, like you can be scared of like the ridicule because it plays into our animal brain of everything is in jeopardy here. And if I share these non-establishment ideas of the experience, how this kind of bucks the system of our kind of, how do I say, materialistic kind of two-dimensional scientific worldview. This goes against everything that we're being taught in the schools and online. This completely shatters the narrative. And if you dare go against the narrative, you're going to be ridiculed and tied all together. I think that's one of the main barriers is the fear of ridicule from colleagues, from the world in general. And unfortunately, it's hard to break that fear because it's natural. Your brain is thinking, I'm fearing for my life here. But I do think as time goes on, as the NDE experience can become hopefully a little more mainstream, this can hopefully ease tensions. And with that ease of tensions and less fear among researchers, experiencers, we can learn a lot more.
Mhm.
Vince, do you want to go?
Yeah. So I think that there's, I would say, three main barriers for people learning about what IANDS, let's say what IANDS does. I guess that's fair because we're at an IANDS conference, right? I think that one of them is, as Darren mentions, the mainstream allegiance to scientific materialism. That's the first one. The second one, I would say, is cultural. I would say that, to give an example, if you look, let's say that we look at European American culture, right? That's us right here, right? And Darren's in the UK. If you look at cultural characteristics among European American cultures compared to other ones, let me just give you an example. So Native American culture, so on spiritual guidance, respect for elders, Hispanic Latino cultures, religion and spirituality, highly valued, respect for elders and authority. African American, importance of religion, interdependence. Asian Americans, respect for elders, respect for one's parents, harmony. Pacific Islander cultures, natural order, balanced relationships, knowledge of the collective. And then when you get to European American, I'm going to read them off to you, and you see how different. Independence and freedom, individualistic and competitive, materialistic, self-reliance valued, and youth and beauty valued. So that's European American culture compared to others in this reference. So I think a big part of it is that our culture has tended to hide death away in nursing homes, hide death away in hospitals, hide death away behind a sheet. And I've been in nursing homes where people haven't had visitors for years, and it's tough. It's tough to bear that. So our culture there's such a fear of being around death in general, because they may not have any of this knowledge. Just, a family that's taking care of a dying loved one. They may have never even heard of IANDS, right? So the third one, and a very important one, is education. And the barrier there is that it's not something that could be told in a couple of sentences. I had someone approach me and they said, "Hey, Vince, I see that you're like a speaker or something. It's some kind of thing you're doing." That's usually how people talk about it, right? So I said, "Yeah, I'm really excited." And he said, well, what exactly is it? You know, what is it, this organization or whatever it is that you're involved with? And I was kind of thinking to myself, do you have 3 hours to sit down with me? No, you don't. And, you know, is the average person reading a near-death experience book or related book once a month like I am and has been for the past 12 years? I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say so. So I think that that's a huge barrier is that it takes true dedicated time and education to understand all of this. And we're still learning so much more. And that's the main thing, I think, is the education, the time. You have to put the time in to learn. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate that. And one of the things I want to say, when you look at culture, I know when I teach my students here, we talk about, many people think culture is race creed. I mean, that's it. No. What about age? What about, let's just say that it could be something about spirituality, religion, et cetera, certainly education, literally. It could be gender. You know how some people say all men over 50, well, what? It's that man and those people and et cetera. But when you look at cultural decision-making and cultural influence, yeah, age, you just mentioned several things. That's all of you were describing. Age could be a big deal. And that's what we're talking about right now, is the young, the youth. So in terms of culture, that is a cultural issue, as well as other things we're talking about right now, literally being about spirituality. And what about spiritually transformative experiences that people experience? We have near-death experiences, but there's also other, as I just said, spiritually transformative experiences. So wow, have we hit a lot? So I'm going to ask y'all right this minute, since at the end of this, you know, I'm going to say something about, hey guys, what are we going to do? How are we going to help? Our very last thing is, what can IANDS do? What strategies do we have? I'm going to say one of the things we should think about is looking at all these barriers we just identified. They're beautiful. Exactly what you said. Each and every one of you said one thing or more about barriers that, wow, if IANDS could focus on that in our education committee, or looking at where we go from here to there in conferences, et cetera, wow. That's huge. So would you agree with me that we should take a look at those barriers in the future? How's that sound?
I'm going to touch on my barrier of fear. And especially with the condition is that we are conditioned to fear not only ridicule from our colleagues, but even fear of death itself. And I really think there is a bit of a disconnect there because, like Darren said, and I actually was out this morning, death is the great equalizer of all things. And I think to tackle a fear, first we really have our work cut out for ourselves, not only with getting rid of fear of ridicule, but fear of death in and of itself. There's actually a practice that I've learned from Greek Stoics and even from a lot of monastic practices in Latin, memento mori, or remember you will die. I think that we can use that in therapeutic settings, spiritual settings, and even medical settings to help someone first get over the fear of death. In terms of fear of ridicule with NDEs, that's where we really have our work cut out for ourselves, because we have to essentially change the whole established order of things. And that's something that takes a while. And with IANDS, with 4 years of research, that's impressive that 4 years they've been able to kind of slowly introduce NDEs as not being crackpot pseudoscience, but that it's well studied. So in the end, I think we really have a work cut out for ourselves, but it's certainly possible that we can eliminate or manage this fear of ridicule and fear of death.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate what you just said about all that in death. And I'll share a quick story with you. And Diane probably is the only one that knows about this one, but besides Nan Bush. But in the first near-death conference that we had, that I was in charge of in San Antonio, that was back in the 90s, in San Antonio, Texas, I am not shy at all about asking people for donations or help or support or whatever. And nobody on the committee could believe I got so much donated. Well, one thing I got donated was a wine and cheese party reception for all the audience in person, obviously back then. And they asked me, where did I get it? And it was from one of the mortuary science industry people here in San Antonio. And they were like, what funeral home would want to sponsor an IANDS reception? And I thought, that's really interesting. You would ask the question because they do so much aftercare. So the person comes to them, they do the death, they do the whole thing, they go to the cemetery, et cetera, et cetera. And a week later or two, now many people in hospice and palliative care do it, but at this time it was so eye-opening to people in IANDS that they would take this as an opportunity to meet people because their care that they give after to the families is something that's exceptional. So you see what I'm saying when you say there's a fear and the fear of death, and oh wow, you're so right. All of you are putting this together so beautifully. And I appreciate when you say it's going to be hard for the youth, like Darren said. I can tell you that there's little avenues we could tap into, like I just gave you now, because the fear of death is enormous, as you know, and maybe little tiny bits and pieces can help. So I had to tell that story. So, okay, which of you is going to go next about the barriers?
All right. First, well said with you, Joe, and Darren. Like all of these barriers and how much can really happen and how society views and different cultural views see everything. But I feel like to specify with the barrier I talked about is social media. I would say you gotta start somewhere. You start at the bottom. You just slowly talk more and more about it. I only learned about IANDS through Vince. If I had never met Vince, I don't think I'd even know about this organization. And my only knowledge of NDEs is through the little books or through online stories that just come out through the cracks every once in a while. But I feel like IANDS, to really overcome, I guess, to slowly normalize it through our culture and slowly normalize it online. You just talk about it, and you get more and more people interested in the topic of NDEs and to really focus more on, hey, this is more important than whatever's happening in news, entertainment, or whatever else is going on in social media land. So I feel like you gotta start somewhere and you build up from there to overcome the barrier of social media norms.
Awesome. Awesome. Vince, what about you?
Yeah, so I really do think that the fear of death is a real problem among Gen Y and Z, shall we say? And I call it the I'm scared or you scared. So it's well, I'm scared. Well, oh, I'm scared too. Well, I was more scared before you were scared. And it's sort of a cultural snowball around the fear of death that has sort of been rolling through, I'd say rolling from the Enlightenment period of science and just sort of has snowballed into this where young people, if they don't have any answers to these fears or these questions. I really think that the average person next to them on the college campus or out at the bar is they don't have that. They don't have answers that IANDS has. So I think that there's a genuine need for this. I really do. I really think that these are real answers on these questions. And I think that if young people knew that and they had that resource, I think that fear can start to disappear. I really do. And I think that's part of the mission. That's part of the mission of IANDS, or at least one of them. And I say, secondly, sort of how Darren said it, most young people, if I would say, let's take your average American city, if you're in college, average American city, right, or high school, you're out drinking with your friends, you're out partying with your friends, having a good time. You're thinking about boyfriends and girlfriends, and you're thinking about your classes, and this for a lot of younger people, this isn't even on their radar at all, you know. So I think that that's a big part of it too. And you know, for me, it's been different. I've carried this in my heart through all of those years. So it's different, I think, for a lot of other younger people. So
Diane, you had 2 questions that you said you had of the guys.
Yes. One, do you think it would help to connect? This is from Katie Conley, our social media person. Do you think it would help to connect NDE knowledge with how it can improve the quality of life?
absolutely. Yes. That's one of the main things about it that I can say for sure. It has changed my life in remarkable ways that I can't even begin to tell you, and created amazing relationships and enabled me to have the courage to pursue a nursing degree and almost being completely done and about to embark on that journey. I owe it all to NDEs, NDEers, researchers, and IANDS 100%. So I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah, I would definitely say absolutely that having this knowledge of the near-death experiences can definitely improve one's life for the better, especially if one previously had a fear of death, where they anxiety, depression. They can definitely has the potential to improve someone's life and to pursue goals, to even forge connections with people, whether you had an experience or not.
And there's a direct correlation there, right, Joe?
Definitely
between not having a spirituality and
oh yes,
rates of suicide and depression. That is a studied issue.
yes.
So yeah,
there's a relationship.
there's a relationship,
and it can definitely improve someone's life.
The other question is from Rob in Massachusetts. Do you think the lack of attention span and the predominance of screens to be difficult in Gen Y and Z, spending the time doing the work to validate that they are more than a mind?
I think it's quite possible. I do think, because we live in the era of screen up to the face. I do think with people with the youngins, their attention span being lesser with the screen, I think it can definitely pose a problem.
So I'm going to ask you, I'll just throw this out because we know the International Association for Near-Death Studies, you've been talking about IANDS so much, but we are about studies too. And so somewhere in the closing remarks of this, we're not closing yet, but could each one of you say something about our third goal was to look at the outcomes we might have in terms of future research with IANDS? So in other words, if we could get the youth educated, aware, knowledgeable about near-death experiences, what might that do to future NDE research?
All right. Well, I really like what Darren said about with the education. I'm going to kind of build a little bit on that and tie into my career, my future career with the clergy. I think this needs to be introduced, like Darren said, in classes. I like the idea of it being put in science classes. I also think it can be introduced in even the religious classes in parochial schools. It's kind of quote Anglican theologian John Milbank on the idea of theology. Theology is the mother of the sciences. And I think putting the near-death experience in theology classes, science classes, any class that deals with the human mind, the psyche, I definitely like what Darren put forth with it being a class, whether especially more than it being just a blurb, like in a lot of psychology classes today, where it's just a blurb. I think we have to really delve deep into this from the educational perspective, from the theological perspectives, dare I say, in some business classes and technology. I think the NDE can cover many bases in various topics.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, so you're as far as looking at future projects, I guess that would be the best way to phrase that. I had a few that I've been thinking a lot about. Like you said, education's already been covered. A 101 course or a college level credited course. I was talking about mentor-mentee program. We actually have one at our university that I participate in. I think it would be interesting if IANDS had one, or maybe a researcher or an IANDS board member takes on maybe a group of students as a mentor, you know, through their college journey, let's say, or their nursing journey, let's say, whatever that may be. I think that would be something that would be interesting. Talked about having a children's book for children that have had near-death experiences, some sort of an illustrated children's book that can help them understand what happened to them. And thinking, I did have one more in my mind. Yeah, it might come to me, but I'll go to John. Go ahead.
Kind of build off of everyone, education is definitely the important thing. We are wired through our education. We learn everything through our education, voluntary and involuntary. With voluntary being, you learn all information you learn from the classes, math, sciences, religions, everything else, and involuntary through social interactions, through classmates, teachers, and groups, and you learn what is kind of acceptable as well through school, through your social interactions. So if there were to be classes and pain near-death experiences in like a positive way, in a way that, hey, this is an important topic, not a 5-second word to just be put in the books, that it could be more socially acceptable for talked about, and then from there it can just NDEs can be more of an important topic as the generations go on, and it can change our lives for the better, I feel like.
Yeah, and my other one was, I talked about this as well, having a questionnaire for experiencers to fill out in the hospital setting, perhaps some sort of that they could be handed at the, you know, well, this strange thing happened to me. Oh, okay. How about you fill this out? We have resources and people that can help you.
Mm-hmm.
So important. I've learned from one of my great near-death teachers that you have to go to the experiencer. That is the first and foremost thing. You have to go to the experiencer. They're the most important part of it. And I'm wondering, Debbie, you have a lot of interaction with students on, you know, as a clinical instructor and a nursing professor and all of that. How have you had students interested in talking with you? I mean, you are one of the leading researchers in this area. I mean, I would be banging on the office door, you know. So.
Well, I can tell you that many students are interested, but all the things you've already said, there's so much on their plate, because you've already said you've got so many things to do. Some of these students are midlife, second kind of career. They used to be in real estate and now they're becoming nurses. They used to be an engineer and now they're becoming nurses. And also people who are 25 years old and, oh, they got to get that job and pay for their loans, et cetera, et cetera. So they've got so much on their mind. But yes, when they hear about near-death experiences, I can't tell you how many people have bought the handbook when they thought, when they saw my name on the front of it, they said, oh my gosh, I just got to have that. So I'm not making fun in any way. I'm saying they're terribly interested and they don't know where else to go. And oh yeah, that patient told me about, etc. So yes, I think students, especially in nursing and medicine, I'm now teaching in the PATH and the other kinds of speech therapy, etc. classes about death and dying. So in the death and dying class, I can certainly interweave in that. Now I can also tell you, because we're getting close to end of time, but when students are looking at that, what else are the weird things out there? What about the nearing death awareness? And we know there's all kinds of things about that. We know there's deathbed visions. We know that I mean, that call it whatever you call it. But when someone has been comatose for a week and all of a sudden they will wake up and start talking to everybody who's not there, they died 4 years ago, and all of a sudden they die. What? It's really amazing to patients, families, and certainly students, and then they want to know more. And then what about, guys, those children who have past lives? when they start talking about something that's very real, and you'll know Dr. Jim Tucker is just the expert on this, and we hope to have him joining us more and more with IANDS. So all these things, yes, Vince, you opening the door to students, what are they thinking? There's so many things, and I agree with you, if you couch it in the right place, maybe we can have students talking about it more and more. So as we come to closing, I'm going to tell you some things that we've said today and in our previous meetings, and I would like you all to add in closing anything you can think that I left out. So strategies is what I said we were going to kind of end with. What the heck can IANDS do in the future? Well, some of the things you've said so far were get youth in IANDS. I mean, literally, let's get them. And I'll tell the audience now that we have talked about, for example, myself being the liaison, Vincent being the representative of youth, of students, of whatever we want to call that, young people. And then Vincent could be that person who's really quote unquote on the board-ish through me. So that's something that we're looking at in reality. And as a stem to that, some of us in the background, right, Diane, we're looking at how can that be funded? Because Diane and I are part of the education council, the education team of IANDS, but we know we need money to get certain things done. So for example, I've asked one doctor here if he would give $10,000 to start more going on with students, quote unquote, students in IANDS to be able to get this education out there and take care of all of us. So that's something that we all need to do. And I believe it's going to happen. So, you know, guys, I told you I was going to ask you this before we closed, and that is, what are we going to set in pace for next year? Because y'all know as well as I do, we are going to come back to the next year's conference, to the 2022 conference, and do some big smash because of what we've done this year. You've also said we're going to look at the barriers. We're going to tell the board to look at the barriers that we've faced. Also, every one of you have said something about social media and using the tools, and you've said beautiful ways of looking at social media. And I think it was Darren who said or got us started on the new normal. What is the new normal going to look like if we're using that and trying to help people in different ways to learn? And the radar, y'all talked about that, how we're kind of off on the radar, the tools we just said, and research, looking at a 101 and having some things in different levels of class, school, etc. How can we take it forward in whatever it might be? Some of you said science and religion. It could be nursing, medicine. It could be the housewife. How do we get it into different kinds of strategies people are using to be a home caregiver of mom and dad who have dementia, etc.? I mean, there's all kinds of avenues we could tap into. So guys, what have I not said that you all would like to say in closing?
I would say that I think that funding of some sort and getting students involved, you know, because we're so grateful to be invited to this conference, and we have received a scholarship to be at this conference, and we're so grateful for that. And also, you know, our friend Matthew, who at his channel Consciousness Matters, who did our wonderful intro video, he's been invited to the conference by way of scholarship, and a nursing friend of mine as well. So that's wonderful of IANDS to have the generosity to do that. And I think that to have scholarships for students of some sort, you know, something to work on between now and next year, I think would enable more students to be involved, because, you know, it can be an expense to pay for the conference as a student, especially if you're full-time, you know, you're full-time in a nursing major or something like that, and you're not working. It can be difficult. And the speakers and all of the IANDS researchers volunteer so much of their time to do this. And I've seen behind the scenes now the amount of work involved and hours and meetings. And I'll tell you what, there's no price tag on it. So there aren't Lamborghinis parked outside and red carpets. It's a lot of hard work, and it's done on the part of a lot of volunteered time. So I'm grateful for that, and all of you speakers, experiencers, and researchers alike. So.